All right, good afternoon, everyone. Really grateful to have you here for best practices for supporting others. My name is Rah Kalon, they, she pronouns, and I am an emotional intelligence consultant who holds a master's in clinical counseling. And I am so excited to hold space with you today to walk you through something that really points to humanity. The best practices for supporting others comes down to our desire to be a community-based creature. And as human beings, that's who and what we are. As mammals, the way that we're built, that's who and what we are. But let's be honest, peopling can be hard, right? Peopling can be a little difficult. So we're going to navigate going through the peopling process and being a support, whether you are a support to a peer, a coworker, a family member, a friend, someone you're dating, someone you're married to, and maybe even some of these things will help you be better supportive to yourself as well, because we need to make sure we're practicing these best practices with us too, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. So we will be going over basic techniques for providing help and support to others. We will be reviewing how to provide support while not taking on the role of a counselor or therapist, because if they're not paying you for that and you didn't go to school for that, no need to put that on your plate. And then, of course, strategies for helping others access professional assistance. Because just because you might not be the professional they need to talk to doesn't mean that they don't deserve professional assistance, and we can help them get resources, right? So those will be the main agenda items that we're touching on today. As I reminded you, if you have questions as we go, please place them in the chat box. If you would like them to be answered as we present in general, then just put it directly to the host. And otherwise, put it for everyone to see, and we'll flow that way. So the first thing is the power of listening. The power of listening in general is something that a lot of people don't recognize is so impactful until you realize you've been feeling like no one's listening to you. Growing up, a lot of us have families that were either in survival mode or maybe a little emotionally distant, emotionally disconnected due to how our lineage has been or due to just the nature of how our parents were and how their parents were with them. So we might not have always felt like people were taking the time to hear us out. This is a big deal and it impacts our ability to open up as we grow and mature into adulthood. And research shows that most people lack a support system of individuals who will truly listen to their personal concerns. Someone might listen lightly, but are they really listening to understand or listening to respond? Let's think about that for a moment. Let's even think about how when we are at work or somewhere and we walk past someone might say something like, "Hey, how you doing?" But they're still walking before you can respond. So we culturally and socially have this thing where we say things to one another, we ask questions to one another, but are we really hanging back to hear the answer? Because if that person we just asked, "Hey, how you doing?" actually needs to say, "I'm not doing that well," but we're already down the street and around the corner before they're able to share that, what was the point of asking? So we really want to start being mindful of this power of listening. And not just listening, I like to highlight active listening. Because listening is a skill, but active listening is a true skill, meaning that you are being present with that person in the moment. You're not trying to think about what I'm going to say next. Take a moment after what they've shared is complete to gather your thoughts and to think about that then instead of feeling rushed. But when you're listening to them, actually listening to them and resonating and relating to the things that they're saying to the best of your ability. Then research shows that the average person cannot identify someone who will listen to them for more than a few minutes. So you might have good friends, you might have family members, and you say, "Oh, I really need to vent. I need to sit down and talk with someone." And you know you'll have their attention for about 5 to 10 minutes. But then they get this glazed look in their eyes, right? They're not making as much eye contact. They pick up their phone and they're talking to you, but they're also on their phone at the same time. The average person can't really identify someone who's just going to sit there and hold space with them, actively listen to them, show them that they're present with them. And the way that being present with one another as humans helps us build connection is unmatched because there's so many other distractions in the world all the time telling us, "Oh, multitask, do more than one thing at one time." However, research is also showing that multitasking is not that effective because you're splitting your attention so many ways. And if someone who you care about needs to talk to you, you really want them to feel like they have your undivided attention because that's how we would want to feel too. And then, of course, the research shows that over 70% of people seeking assistance for their personal concerns reported that having someone to talk to was helpful. I'm surprised that percentage wasn't higher. However, some people might feel uncomfortable if they did not grow up with a family who listened to them, having so much undivided attention. But most of us, even if we're not used to it, get used to it because we want to be seen. That is in human nature. We want to be understood. We want to know that someone else can relate to what we're saying and that it makes sense. Or even if they can't relate, because it's not always about relating. We want to know that someone heard us and that we're not in this by ourselves. So the power of listening is so impactful and it's such a simple tool. It's free 99 to listen. The only thing it costs you is your time, and that is incredibly valuable. You can't get that back. However, sharing that with people in your life who you know could benefit and need it, that's a huge gift for both of you. So let's keep in mind the power of listening as we learn additional tools. The power of normalizing is our next tool. So, the power of normalizing looks a little bit like people struggling with mental issues may feel isolated and may feel they are the only one struggling with the issue. And when we bring in the power of normalizing here, what we're talking about is letting them know you're not the only one who feels isolated. And that doesn't change that I'm sure it's heavy on you that you feel isolated, but I want you to know that you're not by yourself in that. And maybe you imply that, yeah, a couple months ago I was going through a rough patch and I felt isolated too. Or maybe you don't put a story about yourself in it and you just hold space for where they're at. And when we're talking about people struggling with mental issues, we're not specifically saying mental illness. We're not specifically saying that there's something drastically wrong. But what we are saying is that we all have been in a position where we've been struggling, right? We've all been in a position where we feel overwhelmed, anxious, uncertain, fearful. And having someone to be a sounding board can make all the difference in that. And when they're a sounding board, them being able to make what you're experiencing feel normal so that you don't feel like an alien is a huge benefit to being listened to and to having support in the first place. The next bullet talking about people struggling with mental issues may feel embarrassed or ashamed that they have a situation for which they need help. Think about childhood, and for those of you who have children, when you are growing up, you really are trying to learn the skills to show people you're capable of taking care of yourself. You're 3 or 4 and you don't want mom and dad pouring juice for you anymore. No, no, I want to pour juice for myself. And you might spill all left and right, but you want to learn how to do things for you. You're a teenager and you don't want to always ask for permission to go to places. You want to assert your autonomy and be able to move freely and to be able to handle situations that come up. You don't need people, or at least you feel you don't, all in your ear telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing. And then, of course, when you get to adulthood, you really don't want to ask for help because now I'm a grown up. I am in my 20s, my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, my 60s, my 70s, and I should know what I'm doing by now. I shouldn't have to ask for help. But shoulding on yourself is not helpful. It does not hold space for the fact that we are always going to be students in life. No matter what age we find ourselves in, we have to humble ourselves to recognize that it is more than appropriate. In fact, it is so exciting to have the opportunity to ask for help, to become better equipped at supporting yourself. So, this embarrassment and this shame that a lot of people might experience when they're struggling to ask for help, we want to normalize that. We want to point out that yeah, we understand. It's difficult. It's difficult to ask for help. Pride gets in the way, ego gets in the way. However, pride and ego ain't helping nobody. If you're struggling, they're not helping you. If they're not allowing you to have the room and the breath to be able to ask, like, hey, I really could use a listening ear. Hey, I could really use, could you just maybe go to lunch with me? I just need to process some stuff. My head's feeling really foggy right now. But we have to hold space and make it normal for people to say things like that. And creating an office culture or a culture within our community, our family, our friend group where it's appropriate to say those things can start with you. By you just pointing out when you don't necessarily feel like you know what to do and creating space where other people know that it's appropriate to support you too. How about people struggling with mental issues may feel like something is wrong with them because they are struggling with the situation? We're so fearful that we will lose the respect of our peers, our coworkers, our friends, our family, if someone was to find out that we don't know how to answer all these questions by ourselves. There's always going to be something we don't know, though. That's life. That's also the magic of life. We get real frustrated as human beings because a lot of us have control issues with not knowing what's next and not knowing the right answer to everything all the time, or clinging to some false sense of security of course I know all the right answers. That's very naive if we think that. So we have to be open to the idea that no, there's nothing wrong with me just because I don't know how to handle a specific situation, especially if I've never been in the situation before, or if there are a lot of variables or factors in this situation that I might not have been introduced to, might not be familiar or educated on. And there's nothing wrong with me not wanting to just turn and Google it or look it up on YouTube, but maybe really wanting some word of mouth advice and support. So, this is why we want to make it normal for people to admit that they're struggling with the situation. It doesn't mean that they need to always be leaning on you, always telling you, like, hey, tell me what to do here, because that's not what we're advocating for in this training. We are advocating for them to become solution oriented, but for us as the people helping to support them, to point back to them that they are fully capable, that they are worthy of asking for help, and that help will be there when they ask for it. People struggling with mental issues may feel relief when hearing their concerns are not uncommon and are shared by many others. So notice that they use the word relief. They may feel relief. Some people don't always necessarily want to feel common with everybody else. Some people want to feel unique and special because we are unique and special. However, simultaneously, because there's duality in everything, while we are unique and special, we all have a lot of the same similar wants and needs: to be loved, to be sheltered, to be respected, to be understood. So relief does arise for most of us when we have the experience of someone saying, oh, well, yeah, that's not just you by yourself. I've been there before too. And that doesn't mean that they have to go off on a long tangent telling us how they've been there before too. And that's where we'll start talking about the logistics of how to actually offer this support in a couple of slides from now. Because when you are actively listening to someone using that power of listening, and you're actively normalizing using this power of normalizing, it doesn't mean that you have to talk longer than they talked. And some of us might get a little, what do they call it? Word vomit, where you're just so busy trying to be supportive that you've stopped having room for the person you're supporting to share what they specifically need support about. So the relief that they feel when hearing their concerns are not uncommon and that they're shared by you, that is something that can happen just by you saying a simple statement of, oh yeah, I've been there before. And then you pass it back to them to keep sharing on what they're needing to get off of their heart. And then, of course, people struggling with mental issues may feel their symptoms are normal when they hear similar situations that have caused stress or confusion in others. It's relieving. It is. These symptoms of feeling anxious or stressed or overwhelmed, they make us feel like we're shrinking. They make us feel unworthy or less than or incompetent. And hearing that those are not labels that apply to us just because we're having a rough time can be so, so precious and make us feel like bouncing back and showing our resiliency, showing our perseverance is much more a part of us than feeling stressed, anxious, or incompetent, right? So, power of normalizing. Let's move to our next tool of the power of increasing hope. Increasing hope. And remember, if you have questions as we go, if anything we're saying is resonating, pop it in the chat box. So when we talk about increasing hope, when experiencing hopelessness, let's start there, because this is why we even want to increase hope in the first place. When experiencing hopelessness, a person tends to feel paralyzed, but when hopeful, they start to move forward in a positive direction. So hopelessness is kind of a part of our fight, fly, or freeze mechanism in our nervous system. And that hopelessness often makes us start to freeze up. We'll demonstrate depressive symptoms. Nothing seems to be worth it anymore, including us. And when you feel like that, it is paralyzing. It does make you shut down. It makes it hard to get out of bed. And when you are able to be reinforced and fortified with hope, that starts to break up that stagnant energy in you. It starts to create pathways, almost like a dam being broken down and the water can flow again. So now you have something to ride the wave on back into a positive direction, back moving forward. But hopelessness is a real thing. We all have experienced this pandemic together. We all have experienced some horrifying, traumatic things happening in our country together. And hopelessness is something that oftentimes, just walking down the street, you can look in people's faces and see it. And this is why remembering that as humans, we are community-based creatures. And even if I don't know you, I can still spark hope within you. And that doesn't mean I have to talk and speak with you. I can just make really genuine eye contact with you and hold that space. I can just really hold the door open for you. I can just ask you how you're doing and hang back to actively listen to hear what you say. These are the little seeds of hope that we can plant in one another so that people don't feel like they're by themselves in these moments that can feel very dark. Hopefulness causes a person's mood to improve so they feel less discouraged and anxious. Discouragement, similar to hopelessness, can make you feel at a standstill, make you feel blocked in. Anxiety can make you feel like you're losing your mind because your brain is going down all these different rabbit holes of how things can go wrong. But hopefulness, on the other side of the spectrum, gives your brain an opportunity to start to explore how could things go right? Like, it doesn't make me a fool to spend time actually looking at how could things work out. And sadly, socially, we are conditioned that it is more appropriate to look at how things could go wrong in order to be prepared, in order to be on the lookout for when the next shoe will drop or when the next threat will show up, more than we are invited into the opportunity of using imagination, using creativity for our greatest good, instead of to plan out our demise, which a lot of us need to learn how to balance that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be prepared, but there's also nothing wrong with recognizing that sometimes your best preparation is being present in the moment and being able to tend to the situation with the here and now intentions and clarity you have, instead of just trying to pull stuff from a past that frustrates you or a future that makes you anxious. When a person becomes hopeful, it can significantly change their outlook and behavior. So we all probably know people in our life who are kind of Debbie Downers. They don't necessarily mean to be, but they are. And we know how draining it is to spend time with Debbie Downers. Maybe if we're honest with ourselves, the Debbie Downer can be us sometimes, and we can be draining towards ourselves often. However, when we are willing to open up and create room in our life, room in our mental cognition and capacity to see how things could work out for us, see how things turn out well, to find ways to be supportive of outcomes that we actually want to happen instead of hyper focusing on the outcomes we don't want to happen. We see an uptick in our perseverance, in our humility, in our confidence, in our self esteem. Our behavior becomes a lot more selfless and self-care supportive. So we start wanting to take better care of us because we're hopeful about what's coming and we need to be in tip-top shape for when it gets here. And while we're taking better care of us, we start wanting to take better care of other people around us because we see them as worthy and deserving of also being in tip-top shape for the best thing that's coming for them, to meet them as their best self as well. So just being mindful of, it's not just a in the long run positive response you'll experience when shifting into hopefulness instead of feeling hopeless. It is an instant gratification too, because you start to create space in your brain where you can have different neurons firing and wiring together to create new ideas, new opportunities, new creative responses that you hadn't thought of before when your brain was in fight, fly, or freeze mode because of the hopelessness. Making sense? And then, of course, listen and provide reassurance to help people start to feel more hopeful. When you hear someone say something hopeful, pour into them. Like, that's a really great idea. Or, you're right, this isn't going to stay that way forever. You don't have to jump on the bandwagon and start giving them your hopeful ideas too. Maybe if your intuition tells you that's appropriate, or if you have that kind of relationship with the person, yes, do that. But that's not an obligation for you. No one's asking you to have to offer those things. We're just recommending that when you hear someone leaning into hope, that you give them a nudge to keep leaning. It's like, oh, I see that you're choosing to be optimistic. I'm not going to drag you back to pessimism. I might think about dragging you back to realism, but I like that you're actually being optimistic right now. I'm gonna let you have that, and I'm gonna encourage you. I'm gonna give you the head nod. I'm gonna give you the smile. I'm gonna give you the word of encouragement, just so that you know I believe in your hope too. You're not believing in hope by yourself. And that comes back to us being community-based creatures who give each other that support. So let's talk about, in the midst of these best practices to support people, things to avoid, things to be mindful of. So, becoming outwardly upset or anxious. Let's talk about that, right? A lot of us are very empathetic people. Some of us might even identify as empaths, meaning that when we are around people and their energy feels turbulent or chaotic, we start to feel that way too. If they are feeling hopeless or discouraged or upset, we start to catch ourselves feeling a little residue of that as well. So, in response, if we're not mindful, we might start to notice that we're becoming upset and anxious in response to them and their energy that they're radiating. They might be conscious of their energy, they might not be, but we have to be conscious of our energy. And if we're here to support them, we can't allow ourselves to start becoming outwardly upset because that shuts down the safety of them being able to let us know what's going on. We really want to remain intentional at being present with them in whatever thing, situation, adversity they're navigating, and not taking it personal. Even if you are an empath and you're empathetic, there are ways to practice grounding yourself, grounding and protecting your energy so that you don't feel like you're succumbing to the residue of what they're radiating off of them, but that you can still hold space for them. And there's nothing wrong with also creating boundaries over how long you can hold certain space for certain people. If it starts to impact your mental health, your emotional health, heck, even your physical health, then it might be beneficial to create those boundaries so that you know I can offer them a good half hour. I can offer them a lunch break. But then the other half of my lunch break, I need to decompress. I need to shake off whatever stuff that they were spewing because they were stressed and anxious so that when I go back to work or when I sit back down at my desk, I feel not burdened, not heavy, but like myself again. Things to avoid include attempting to solve the person's problem or concern. This is a big one because a lot of us are just really helpful and we really want people to feel better, especially if it's someone we love and we care about and we're close to. We don't want to see them suffer. However, even if we don't want to see them suffer, it is not for us to start telling them what to do. That, in a lot of instances, might point to some control issues, some control mental struggles that we have on our own end. And we need to work with ourselves on that and not project that at someone else. We might not even be intentionally meaning to come off as a know it all. That might not be the intention at all, but let's take a moment to define the difference between intention and impact. Your intention might be really good as you give them all these suggestions and ideas for what they could do different and how they need to create boundaries and how they need to cut that person off and how they need to make sure that they're clocking out at this time or how they need to work harder. You could have the best intentions in the world while you do that. But the impact might make them feel more judged, more incompetent, less confident, embarrassed, frustrated, and maybe even a little resentful of you because you seem like you have all this worked out and they're over here feeling like they're struggling, like they're drowning. So we're not here to attempt to solve their problems for them or to give unsolicited advice. How many of us get frustrated when someone's like, let me tell you what you should do? And we didn't ask them what should I do? I didn't ask you that. So how about we just hold the space for pointing to them and saying, you are capable of solving this problem. And I got your back. I'm here to hear the ideas you come up with and to let you know, like, hey, it's worth leaning into that hope. It's worth asking people to actively listen so that we can normalize what you're going through and apply hope to it so that you feel confident with where you're headed next. But it doesn't require us coming in to tell them exactly what they need to do. They need to learn that they can rely on themselves, but they also need to learn that it's safe to lean on other people while they are learning to trust themselves again, too. It's all a balancing act. It's all about finding a good equilibrium here. And then things to avoid, telling the person what to do, like we're talking about. It depends on how you grew up. Some of us really grew up kind of bossy. Maybe you're an older sibling or the oldest sibling. Maybe you're the younger sibling and you never really got to tell other people what to do. So now in adulthood, it feels good to be able to assert that authority. But in order to maintain these relationships, And to keep it safe and to keep it brave, we have to really hold space for, I don't need to enable you to think that every time you have a problem, you have to bring it to me. I do want to enable you to know that whenever you're having a problem, I will listen, but not to expect that you have to bring it to me to solve it for you or for me to tell you what to do, because I want to support and honor your autonomy, honor your experiences, honor what you think is best, because you're the only one in your unique situation. I might have been in similar situations, but it's still you that is going to be the best advocate for you. And I believe in you, and I hold this space of hope for you. Then also thinking about things to avoid, including taking on the role and responsibility of a therapist or doctor and giving direction or advice. So all of this kind of goes hand in hand. But however, having my master's in clinical counseling, we've had to be very mindful of creating boundaries with our loved ones over, while I do have this expertise now, it's not appropriate for me to conduct that with you. So I'm going to help get you resources. I'm going to hold your hand as you call and make appointments with other therapists and other doctors. But we don't need to dive into that kind of relationship, because I am your friend, or I am your family member, or I am a peer. And I want to maintain and protect that relationship because I'm most effective for you here right now. So if you have not been trained professionally in these areas of therapy or counseling, and even if you have been, we want to be very, very mindful of not trying to project that into our personal or professional relationships. We want to hold space for really just being an active listening ear, normalizing the situations people are going through, and helping them to feel hopeful about their ways and their choices in navigating it, more so than making them codependent or reliant on us. Making sense? So let's talk about honoring resiliency, because that's really what we're getting to with all of this. When a person receives support, normalization, and increased hope, they tend to move forward and solve their own problems and concerns. That's the nature of people. We are resilient. We are perseverant. We have grit. We have tenacity. And as long as we know that if we did get overwhelmed, if we did lose sight of hope, we could turn and look at our over our shoulder. We could turn and look at our peers to our left or our right, and they would give us the nod of, you got this, keep going. Then we can get through anything. And people, decade after century, have continued to show that we can get through anything if we have support, if we have hope, if we have the opportunity to problem solve and to have sounding boards. Resiliency includes all the factors that can help us overcome stress and resolve life challenges, including our support system and knowing that people got our back, the ability to think positively and to create space within our brain to go through all the ways things could work out and not just hyper focus and ruminate on all the ways things can go wrong. And then problem solving skills, feeling equipped to think outside of the box. And that's where imagination is so important, especially for us as adults. Some of us left our imagination in childhood, and we cannot afford to leave it there. We have to take the time to go back and get it. Because problem solving, the best creative problem solving, is going to come from being able to imagine things that might not always be readily available for you to perceive already around you. Imagining having the ability to make better connections. Someone had to imagine that a cell phone could exist before cell phones existed. Imagining being able to get from point A to point B without it taking days, weeks, months. Someone had to be able to imagine airplanes. So getting to a place where we are honoring our resiliency in ourselves and in the people we're supporting involves making sure that we are a solid support system, that we are actively applying our ability to think positively for ourselves, as well as hold that positive, hopeful space for other people in our support system, and then being creative and imaginative with our problem-solving skills. It is important to respect one's ability to solve their own issues and resist urges to do this for them. That's where the term enabling comes from. It will make us feel good at the moment, and it might even make the person we're supporting feel good at the moment. There's no guarantee that it would, but it might. However, next time that they are up against a challenge, they're going to go back to feeling shrunk and unable and incompetent again. And they're going to look to us, and we want to start to groom one another to feel confident that you can look to me, but I'm still going to look back at you like you got this. You can look to me and I'm still going to turn right back around and be like, so what do you think we should do? You can look to me because sometimes we just need to know we're not by ourselves and that we're not losing it because we're feeling overwhelmed. But then we still need to have the ability to believe that we know what's best for us, even if we don't know and we're following intuition and gut instinct. Part of our resiliency as people has to come back into trusting our intuition and our gut instincts. There's a lot of mistrust we have with ourselves. And that's why having a healthy support system is so important. Because if we were raised with parents or caretakers who second guessed a lot of our decisions, when we're in adulthood and we're trying to make decisions for ourselves, that voice, that self talk will sound a lot like that parent or caretaker that second guessed us. And so that's the benefit of having someone to turn to and say, what do you think about this idea? Because, yeah, we're second guessing ourselves. But if someone outside of us can say, oh, yeah, I believe in that. I'm real hopeful about that. And most importantly, I believe in you and I know you're going to figure this out. That is starting to, in a way, help us to reparent ourselves. And what reparenting really comes down to is helping to heal those wounds that were created from cracks that maybe our parents, our caretakers didn't necessarily see were forming when we were growing up. Because they're human too, and they were also probably trying to reparent themselves. So in our adulthood, being able to rely on awesome people in our support system to hold space for us and to believe in us in the ways that maybe we didn't always feel believed in the past, it makes all the difference. It's just as beautiful as the power of listening, that active listening we started talking about. And it does build into that resiliency and that hopefulness that we're really wanting to embed and help people to internalize. So, positive solution focused problem solving. It's a mouthful, right? But positive solution focused problem solving is all about one, helping people to lean into hope. Also, not just giving them answers, but asking them great questions to help them to pull out the answers from themselves. A person feeling particularly overwhelmed and helpless may pressure you to give them advice or tell them what to do. They might really come at you like, hey, I know you've been through this situation. I saw you get through it multiple times. What did you do? Like step by step. I need a Google Drive document of all the bullet point things that you did. Taking a positive solution focused approach keeps you focused on their resiliency and not focused on your obligation to answer all these questions for them. Because what happens if you do start telling them what to do and then it doesn't work out for them? Now they're mad at you. They were forcing you, pressuring you to tell them what to do. You actually gave in. You told them all the things you did. You swore by your path and your process, and then it doesn't work out for them. And now there's mistrust because they think you gave them bad advice when really you just told them what worked for you when it was most important for you to support them in figuring out in a solution focused approach what is best for them. And whether they trust themselves or not, they are the best decision maker for what is best for them. So ask the person questions like, what has helped you resolve problems in the past? So in this scenario, they come up to you. I know you've been through this problem time and time again. I've seen you overcome. What did you do? And you can say, I've had to do a lot of trial and error for a lot of things. But when you've come up against things like this in the past, because I know you've come over hard things too, what has helped you resolve these problems? So it doesn't sound like you are dismissing their question. It just is you redirecting their question so that they are giving themselves answers. And that way, if it works out for them, excellent. If it doesn't work out, they can come back to you and know that it's safe to continue to brainstorm. Maybe ask the person who in your support system is helpful with these types of concerns. So this is in the mindset of maybe you aren't their closest friend. Maybe this is a coworker or a peer, and you don't feel comfortable maybe leaning too much into their personal business. So redirecting them to asking who else in your closer circle has been helpful for these types of concerns. Even just asking that question can help them start to remember and feel hopeful because they're starting to recognize, okay, there are other people I can ask about this. I did talk to my aunt that one time, and she actually had a wealth of wisdom for me. I actually talked to my mechanic and he gave me some really good gems. You know what? I'm going to go get an oil change. You're right. Who else in my support system could I ask? It helps them start to generate and recognize that one, you, the person they're talking to, is not the end all be all for help. So there's not that burdensome pressure on you, but it also helps them to feel more confident that I'm not in this by myself. Once again, normalizing the situation and helping them to apply that hope just because you were willing to actively listen and help them to start to remember to listen to themselves. Maybe you ask the person, can you share with me progress you have already made? So let's say in a new scenario that there is someone that in the past you might have done a little enabling with them, right? Because it was just easier. You had been through the situation that they were going through. They asked simple questions. It was easy to give them simple answers. But now you're starting to notice you are just coming to me for everything. And I don't get the sense that you're actually trusting yourself to apply what you think would be best before you ask me. You're just coming straight to me so that I can do the thinking for you. And you don't want to have that as a relationship. That starts to build resentment. So you start to ask questions like, okay, I hear your question. Tell me this first, though. What progress have you already made in brainstorming this? What progress have you made? And say it to them like you know that they're fully capable of making progress. You're not saying it to them like, you again, you're back, asking more questions, wanting my answers for free. No, we're not applying judgment here, but we are holding them accountable to being a human being who is capable of navigating these problems and finding solutions on their own as well. And then we might even ask, what ideas do you have for solving your concerns? So instead of just hyper focusing on what progress they've made, because maybe they feel like they've made progress and maybe they feel like they haven't. If you have time and you would like to allocate that time towards them, why not start talking about, well, let's sit down. What ideas do you have for solving your concerns? Let's workshop this together. Even words and terms and phrases like let's workshop this together make people feel super supported because now they know, okay, if I come up with ideas that I don't really like, at least there's someone here who can laugh with me about them. Someone here who can say, I could see that working here, but maybe tweak this there and suggest things to me without completely taking over this problem for me and making me feel like I wasn't capable of doing it on my own. So let's get into how you protect you as you support other people with best practices. Telling your story, comfort and safety issues. So when you are supporting someone else, and especially when it gets into the realm of you opening up and telling a little bit about yourself, or maybe sometimes a lot about yourself, in order to make room in the conversation for them to feel related to, we want to start asking ourselves these questions. What is my general comfort level in sharing with others? You want to be mindful of, oh, is that a story that I don't typically tell people? Is that a work appropriate story? Am I comfortable saying that out loud? Have I gotten to a confident place with what I'm sharing? Because if I haven't, it would be putting me at risk of spiraling mentally or struggling myself if I share this too prematurely. So, really checking in over what is my general comfort level in sharing with others. Then maybe even asking yourself the question, are you comfortable if what is shared is repeated around the workplace or the town you live in? Because let's say you tell them something and it is so profound for them. It's really vulnerable for you, but it's so profound for them. And they're like, can you believe what Rah told me the other day? They told me that X, Y, and Z happened to them at this point in life and that they had never felt lower before, but that they struggled and they tried and they went through the tribulations and then they came out of it. But it took this long and it was really, really hard for them. If someone else comes up to me later and it's like, wow, so and so told me that story about how you were at your lowest point a couple years ago, I was working with you then. You didn't tell me, but it explains because you looked really rough then. How's that going to make you feel? How's it going to make you feel? So being mindful over, if I tell this story, am I prepared for it to come back to me? Sometimes twist it around. Sometimes the story not always coming back the way you told it. And is that going to make me feel like my mental and emotional health is compromised? And if it will, then let me not tell that story because it's not doing me or them any favor. It might bless them briefly, but it's going to cause me more harm. And I'm really showing up to support this person, not to betray myself. So let's be mindful of that. Even asking the question, am I comfortable if the person I open up to rejects what I have to say, even verbally lashes out? Because depending on who we're talking to, If they're stressed or feeling backed into a corner and we start opening up and sharing something with them, they might pop off on us. They might reject it. They might push it away. They might be mean about it, or maybe even indifferent. We're pouring out our life story, our heart, and they're like, cool story, dude. Thanks. I still don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And you were so heart led in wanting them to know you're not by yourself, and I see hope in you, and these are the things that I had to go through, and they're dismissive of what you shared. If you think that it's going to ruin your relationship with them or ruin your day to have them respond like that, don't risk putting yourself out there that way. It's not that your story isn't worthy of being shared, but are they the one who needs to hear it? And asking yourself, are you telling them the story for them or for you? If you're telling them this story for them, then no matter how they take it or they leave it. But if you're telling them the story for you because some part of you is still healing, and telling them this story is making you feel a little bit more confident in your own ability to heal from it, then it could make it a lot more vulnerable if they don't take the story the way you wanted them to. And it can burn a bit. And there's no need to put yourself in that situation if you can be self aware enough to know in the beginning, this might not be a story that I really want to share with everybody. Remember, you can be very helpful to others, even if you do not share your knowledge, your wisdom, or anything about yourself. You can be incredibly helpful. And I think that a lot of us haven't necessarily learned that skill of how to hold space for people, how to actively listen, and how to be hopeful with them and for them without having to interject ourselves in there or make it personal for us. There is a skill in being able to do that, and that's something that we're advocating for you learning here. Telling your story and honoring diversity issues. So, diversity superstars, as we like to call them, assume that every person they talk with is unique because every person who you talk to is unique. There has never been a you before, and there will never be a you again, just like there's never been a me before, and there will never be a me again. However, even with that, we're all people, and we are all trying to navigate this thing called life to the best of our ability. So when we're telling our story, we want to leave room in there for their uniqueness to find its own way to resonate with what we're talking about. We also want to remember that each person we talk to is not like us. They are like us because every human has the basic foundation of needs that we all share. However, they might, because of culture, because of background, because of upbringing, because of experiences they've had, not identify the same ways that we do. When people are talking to someone and they aren't very familiar with them, but they're talking to them as if, oh, well, yeah, we're from the same race, so you know what I'm talking about. Everybody's ethnicity that shows up in their race might be different. So, really holding space for, no, our experiences might not have been the same. So, let me not burn a bridge by acting and assuming that you have the same background as me. Let me leave room for you to teach me about who you are so that there's room for our relationship to grow deeper because I let you tell me about you versus me try to tell you about you without me actually having a premise to know that. Also, assuming that all people live on their own planet. I don't know about you, but I like being a little alien. Sometimes it can be a little lonely, but being an alien and recognizing that all of us are on our own little planets, orbiting ourselves, everything really in our own way is a little egocentric. It comes down to being about us in a lot of instances. But once we are able to get out of the egotistical nature of that, we're able to apply that understanding in honoring diversity in other people. So once I can accept, like, I know I'd be on my own little planet, then when I go to talk to someone else and support them, I can remember they're probably on their own little planet. And when I approach them, I need to be mindful of maybe the gravity on their planet is different than the gravity on mine. Maybe the quality of the air on their planet is different than the quality of air on mine. Maybe I feel like I can breathe easily, but maybe they don't. Maybe they feel a little choked up. So just holding that space and leaving room for people to relate the way that they relate instead of projecting on them the way they're expected to relate. So if you share your story, assume the other person may not be able to relate to it. So just like the previous slide, this slide is also really speaking to, in our experience, releasing expectation. If we are going into situations with this expectation that this story that I'm about to tell them, my way of relating to them is about to change their life, that expectation can let you down. That expectation can burn you. And it's not for you to try to be life-changing. It's just for you to be supportive. And if that support happens to be life-changing, beautiful. But to set such high expectations potentially sets you and them up for failure. And there's no need to do that. You're just here to actively listen, to normalize what they're going through in a way that's not belittling of what they're going through, to help them to be hopeful and optimistic, and to be solution oriented in their problem solving. That's what we're here to do for one another and for ourselves. So, if you share recommendations, once again, releasing our expectations, we assume that they may not fit the other person. And we leave room for that possibility when we're sharing this. So, you might say something like, so this is something that helped me. I don't know if this will help you, but it did work out for me. So, it's just a recommendation. And then always offer options and choices. So if you're giving someone a referral somewhere, it's like, yeah, this was my therapist, but this is also the website that I saw a bunch of different therapists on. So maybe you go and check them out. Check out the whole website instead of just sending them only to the person who you are recommending. That way they can once again make a autonomous, informed decision for themselves. And then if it works out for them, great. If not, they have a resource that gives them options and choices so they can go and try again. We really want to hold space for people being open to trying again. We really want things to go a certain way the first time, but that ain't often how life flows. Sometimes it is through repeated attempts that we actually get fortified and stronger, and our resiliency grows and increases. So, giving them choices and options in your recommendations really gives them the support to additionally keep trying, keep growing, keep evolving. So, referrals for you as the supportive people that you are, helping the people in your community, whether it's family, friends, coworkers, peers, community members. Remember, you are not the only resource for fellow employees. You have a solid partner in your employee assistance program. And we really want you to take a full advantage of the benefits of your EAP program. So, EAP callers speak directly with a qualified mental health professional who will provide assistance, referrals, and resources. So, if you have coworkers and they seem like they're going through a really heavy time, you don't have to step in and play counselor or therapist. You can redirect them to the resources that all of you have available through your EAP program. When appropriate, you can dial the EAP number and introduce the employee. So it can be a warm handoff, just in case maybe they're just so frantic and like, I don't know the number. It's like, here, give me your phone. I'll put it in for you. And then give out the EAP number liberally. Have it posted around the office, or maybe if you are in HR, have it attached at the bottom of your signature. If you know that people in the office have been struggling lately, even if you're not in HR, apply it at the bottom of your signature so that people know, okay, we got each other's back here. This is a supportive environment. We all know it's been a rough time lately, and this is a way for us to be mindful over making sure everybody has access to these resources. So, with that being the case, we have 4 minutes left, and I would love if you enjoyed this training and if you got something really fruitful out of it, please scan the code and let us know how you felt about it. And then also, I am still here if there are questions that you have, but it has been excellent sharing with you so far. And I know that if you can apply active listening, if you can apply normalizing these situations, and if you can apply optimistic, really solution oriented problem solving with yourself and with one another, we're going to continue to have a beautiful support system in our workplaces and in our communities. So my name is Rah Kalon. Please let me know if you have any questions in the chat box.